Hey guys, welcome back to the channel Binary Everest. This is the part 2 of our tutorial series Linux from scratch beginners to advanced. Today in this video we will be exploring different installation methods for Linux followed by exploration of different kinds of GUI. We will be covering different kinds of desktop environment that are available in Linux ecosystem, and at last I'll clear the nuance between terminal versus shell versus console. I hope you will be along with me throughout this video. So without wasting any time, let's get started. So guys, I didn't create any tutorial on installation of Linux as there are plenty of resources guiding and so for each of these methods. I'll just analyze the pros and cons of each of these methods and suggest which one should you go with. Well, there are three different methods. The first one being dual boot, and second one is installation with virtual machines using hypervisor softwares, and third one is the methods which has come out recently. It is provided by Windows and the name is Windows Subsystem for Linux, which is abbreviated as WSL. In next slides we will understand each of them in detail. So let's talk about dual boot. This is one of the most common ways of installing Linux, and in fact the most purest way of doing so. Purest in the sense you will be directly installing Linux on your bare metal, on your hardware. There will not be involvement of any other softwares like in other methods. For example, in case of virtual machine method, there will be involvement of hypervisor softwares, or even in case of WSL, there will be some software level abstraction. This won't happen when you install Linux directly on your hardware. So this is pure Linux running directly on top of your hardware, no involvement of any other software in between, and this is the genuine method of installation. And not to mention, it need not be dual boot, it can be single boot alone by completely erasing the Windows. Since most people like to keep Linux alongside Windows, so that's why we are talking about dual boot, but there won't be any difference in keeping Linux alone or alongside Windows. So what happens in dual boot is that you will have option to boot multiple operating system but one at a time. Here you can see you'll get some interface like this. After you press power button on your system, you can directly boot Ubuntu or you can boot your Windows. So you'll have options like this. So this is what means by dual boot. Now let's talk about some of the pros of this method. The first one being uncompromised performance. Since in this method there is no need for sharing resources like CPU and memory, you will get the optimal performance. You can completely use your hardware resources, but in case of virtual machine you have to allocate certain portion of your CPU, certain portion of your memory for your guest operating system, so which will eventually degrade your performance, but this won't happen in case of dual boot. And the second one being complete Linux experience. It's like the pure form as I have explained, while in case of virtual machines and the other methods there will be involvement of other software in between. So in case of dual boot, even if you are working at low level, you will get the best stability. Your system won't break, your system won't crash. The third one being better power usage. Since here the resource usage will be optimal and it will be minimal since you are only running one operating system, so there will be efficient power usage. Now let's talk about some of the cons of this method. Setup is difficult as you need to create a bootable flash drive and you need to create a separate partitions in your hard drive and install it. So it is like quite difficult process compared to other methods. Switching is hectic because you can only boot one operating system at a time. If you want to go to Windows, then you have to shut down your Linux system first and then boot Windows. You cannot run both the system at once, so that's why switching is difficult. File sharing is not easy. Sometimes you cannot share the file between your Windows and your Linux system, but in case of other methods it is much easier. So now let's talk about the method which is widely used in case of cloud infrastructure. Also it is equally common to use it in our local system to install multiple operating system. This method is by using virtual machine. In this method we will require a software known as hypervisor which will be running on top of our host operating system. Now on top of our hypervisor we can install different operating systems. Now the things like giving resources to our guest operating systems, setting up environment for them will be all handled by these hypervisors. These two are the examples of freely available hypervisor softwares which are free for non-commercial use. You can install any one of them and create your virtual machine on top of this hypervisor software and install your guest operating system on top of this. Now let's talk about some of the pros of this method. The first one being easy installation. These days hypervisor software are directly providing the option for easy install, using which we can directly install the operating system without following any installation wizard. The second one being convenient switching. Since using the guest operating system will be just like using another application in your host operating system, switching between the two operating system is very easy in case of this virtual machine method. The third one being multiple distros. Just in case you want to run multiple operating systems simultaneously, maybe to run multiple distros of Linux, maybe Ubuntu or Kali at the same time, then you can easily do with this virtual machine method. The fourth one being taking snapshots and rollbacks. It is useful in the case when you want to do some experiments with system level things and there is a good chance that you may break the system. So before doing such experiments, you can take snapshots, and if something goes wrong during your experiments, you can roll back and get to the initial stage. So this is one of the major advantage with virtual machine. Now let's talk about some of the cons of this method. The first one being shared resource. Since in this method you are running at least two operating system, just in case you are running one guest operating system, the host also has to run, so you'll be running multiple operating system. That's why the resource has to be shared. Suppose you had 8 gigabits of RAM and let's say a CPU with 12 cores, then you might need to give something like 4 GB of RAM and 4 cores of CPU to your guest operating system, which will eventually lead to performance degradation as well as your host machine. And apart from that, there will be some hardware limitations. There won't be good hardware support for your virtual machine. So just in case you are working at some low level, you might not get expected behavior with virtual machine. Now let us talk about another method, which is Windows Subsystem for Linux, or WSL. This is the method which has been recently developed by Microsoft so that the users don't have to go to any other Linux based operating system to use their Linux command or for using any other Linux packages. And since this method has developed, it has actually developed a good relation between Windows and Linux. I'll justify this later. For now, let us go to some of the pros of this method. The first one being easy installation. You'll just need one or two commands to install entire Linux system on your Windows. That's how easy it is. Just one or two commands. And the second being fastest boot time. You literally go to PowerShell, and if you press WSL command, it will just take maybe 1 or 2 seconds to give you the Linux prompt. So it is very fast. And third point is tightly coupled with Windows. You can now use Linux command to interact with Windows file system. You can use mkdir command of Linux to create folder in Windows. So there has been good relation between Linux command and Windows file system. The fourth point being the support for GUI apps. In its earlier version, which is WSL1, had no support for GUI apps. Since WSL, it has came with lots of improvement, including support for GUI apps. Now let's talk about some of the cons of this method. The first one being it's not 100% native. As I had explained earlier, there exists a layer of abstraction. In fact, WSL runs on top of lightweight virtual machine. It's not as equivalent as directly running Linux on top of bare metal hardware. So the consequence is low level tools might not work well if this is the scenario. If you are someone working at low level softwares, then you might not get expected behavior from WSL. And the third point is it is recently developed. Why this is a problem? Because there will not be very good community support. If some new software has emerged out, there is a good chance that you may encounter a problem which others have not encountered. So in such scenarios, you might not able to get help from the community. So these are the few major disadvantages with WSL. Now let us explore different types of graphical user interfaces available for Linux. These are also known as desktop environments, and there are lots of desktop environments available for Linux. I have listed a few here. The first one is KDE Plasma, the second one is XFCE, and third one is GNOME. Among all this, GNOME is the most popular one due to its modern UI design, and after that KDE Plasma also has good user interface, but XFCE does not have very good user interface. It is designed for a system with low resources. So for systems like Raspberry Pi, if you are installing Linux on Raspberry Pi, then there we will mostly prefer desktop environments like XFCE. Now let us quickly see how each of these user interface looks like. I have attached a screenshot here so that I can show you the major components. This one is the application menu in KDE Plasma. This is your settings, and this is the file navigator. You can see the design looks pretty good. Now let's see how XFCE looks like. As you can see here, the design is not pretty good. So user interface, user experience is not going to be very nice if you are using XFCE as your desktop environment. So this is mostly designed for system with low resources. Now let us talk about GNOME.
GNOME is the most popular desktop environments in Linux ecosystem, and the reason for its popularity is due to its modern user interface elements and its highly customizable nature. I have installed these desktop environments in my system, and as this comes pre-installed in case of Ubuntu. Currently I am on Ubuntu 22.04, and the GNOME is the default desktop environment that is provided in Ubuntu releases. This is how the desktop looks like. Here you can see lots of icons, as this is my regular system, but it won't be this much clutter in your system. It will be, everything will be clean. So this is how desktop looks like. Below you can see the taskbar, a list of pinned application, and the list of the application that are currently running. And this is the application menu, and you can see here the interface looks much like in case of mobile phones and tablets. After that, you can press the activities button to enlist different workspaces, and you can create multiple workspaces here. After that, these are dates, and these are the applications which are continuously running on the background, and this is keyboard, and these things are pretty common, you all know it. Also, I'll quickly show you the file manager. So this is how it looks like. Here you can see, if you go to somewhere, you can create multiple tabs here. You can open multiple windows, so everything is like normal things. And these are my storage systems that are currently installed in my system, and you can see here you can directly connect to something like FTP server or SMB server to access your files. So this is how the GNOME desktop environment looks like. So guys, let me introduce you to the software which we will be going to use most of the times while we are on Linux. We won't be using any graphical things in Linux, so most of the things in Linux are command line. So let me take you to the software where we will be firing our commands, and the software is none other than terminal. So in order to start terminal, you can press the shortcut key Ctrl Alt and T. So this is how the interface looks like, and this software you can see here, this is known as terminal. And let me explain you a few more things here. So here in the terminal you can type your commands here like this. So let's put our very first command, which is going to be who am I. So this is the command which will give us the current user of the system. So you can see this is the current user, and let me talk about this part. So the first part here is, you can see this is the username. So Aparijit is the username, and @ is just the separator, and this part is known as host name. This is the name of the device. In case of network, it will be resolved to an IP address. So this is just like user at hostname.com. So you have seen we know our Google accounts like user at gmail.com, right? So what is gmail.com here? It is host name, right? And this host name will be resolved to certain IP address, right? So this is same thing here. This is username at host name. This name will be resolved to the IP address of my system in the local network. And after that, this colon is just the separator. And so this place you can see here is the place for current working directory, and this indicates from which path in our system we are executing the command. So in order to print current directory, we have to give the command pwd. So you can see here, this indicates that we are inside home folder. Inside home folder there is another folder called Aparijit, and we are inside that. And this tilde symbol is the shortcut for this entire thing, home Aparijit. You can see here, if I do something like echo tilde sign, you can see this is just the shortcut for home Aparijit, and we are inside this directory. So what is current working directory? It is like, as I said, it is the folder from where we are executing the command. So if I do ls command, this command is used to enlist the files in our current working directory. So this command will now show the files inside this home Aparijit, which is our current working directory. There is another command called cd, which is used to change our working directory. So let me take you to the top of our path hierarchy. So this is root. Now if I put ls command here, I'll see the files inside the topmost hierarchy. So I'll talk about all of this path later in the tutorial. So basic thing that I want to explain today is you need to understand what current directory is, and other things is like you have to understand the how you are going to be working in the terminal. You'll put some command, you'll get the output. So that is how we'll do in terminal. After that, this dollar sign you can see here, this indicates that you are the normal user and not the super user. If you are super user or the root user, it will be hashtag. Let me quickly show you. So if you do sudo su yeah,
You can see here this, now this has been changed to hashtag. This indicates that you are the root user. The root user is the user having highest privilege in the Linux system. So don't worry about anything for now. I'll explain all of these things later. Now I'll also like to talk about one more thing, which is shell. So what is shell? It is like your interpreter, just like you write code in Python, and there is Python interpreter which will interpret your code. So who is executing our command? It is shell who is interpreting our command. So the software that we have currently opened is the terminal program, and inside this terminal, this prompt you are seeing is coming from shell. So I can see which shell I'm using by giving the command echo $0, and you can see this is bash shell, and this is one of the common shell used in Linux, and there are others available too. The most basic one is the sh shell, and built on top of that, after adding many features, this bash has come up. And there is another one which is like the most recent one, and these days is being adopted to lots of system. In I have seen in other variants like Kali Linux, this GSS has been the default shell here, and I believe in the recent versions of Ubuntu like 2025 might have GSS as the default shell. However, in my system currently I'm using bash shell, but GSS is the modern. It comes with lots of more features than bash and sh. This is shell. So I hope you understood the difference between terminal and shell. Now sometimes people will call it as console as well, and that is where the confusion arises. Now let me clarify you the doubt. So what happens here is I have so actually one component is missing here. So instead of console, here it will be terminal. I opened some app in my system, right? So that is the terminal here, and terminal provides me user interface to type the commands. So that is the job of terminal interface, and whatever command that I type, it will be provided to the shell, and this shell interprets my command. So basically underlying, it will talk to the kernel, and kernel will talk to the hardware, uses the hardware resources in order to execute my command, and like whatever the output comes will be sent back to the terminal. So this is the entire flow. Now, so far we have discussed about what terminal and shell is. Now let us explore what exactly console is. So in order to understand console, we have to rewind a little bit back to the history, and let us go back to the days before graphical user interface existed. At that time, the only way to interact with a computer was through the command line interface, and for that a special physical device was used. The device consisted just of a screen and a keyboard, and the sole purpose of this device was to let users input commands and view their output. That dedicated hardware device was something known as console. But as technology progressed, operating systems evolved, and so did the hardware. The physical console setup slowly became obsolete. Instead of one integrated device, we began using separate components, monitors for display and keyboards for input. This shift led to the introduction of virtual consoles. These virtual consoles are the software-based alternatives that mimic the old physical consoles. However, virtual consoles have some limitations. You could only run one session per console. That's where terminal emulators come in. Terminal emulators like the ones used on modern Linux system allows us to open multiple sessions inside the same environment. However, virtual consoles had a limitation. You could only run one session per console. That's where terminal emulators come in. Terminal emulators like the ones we used on modern Linux systems allow us to open multiple sessions inside the same environment. These sessions are known as pseudo terminal slave or PTS. Your terminal emulator essentially emulates a virtual console, hence the name. It overcomes the limitations of our traditional console by supporting multiple interactive sessions at once. For example, in Ubuntu, if you press Ctrl Alt and F3, F4 or F5, any other function keys, you'll switch to different virtual console. And I cannot show that right now because if I go to the virtual console, my screen recorder won't work. So I'll attach one screenshot. So this is what is known as virtual console. So I had started this by pressing Ctrl Alt plus F3, and you can see here this is like your terminal. You can fire up your commands here, and here is the more clear picture. You can see it is known as console, and the web version is also like available at this host at this port number. So this is the virtual console, and you can open multiple consoles, but the limitation with this console is you cannot open multiple sessions at once. But in case of terminals, we can open multiple tabs like this. And as I had said, this is the real virtual console. So if you put one command tty, it will show /dev/tty3. So tty is the actual virtual console,
But if you come to terminal and put the same command, you will see here it will show dev/dev/pts0. so this is like, this is not the actual console, but some kind of emulator for that. So if you go to another terminal and put the same command tti, you'll get it is a different pts now. So pts stands for pseudo terminal slave. The name itself suggests it is not the actual console, rather a virtual one. So in summary, the console was the original physical command interface. It was a separate hardware, and later we adapted the virtual form of that physical hardware, and it is known as virtual console. And we also saw that there is also a room for virtual console in modern Linux distributions. And the terminal, or more precisely the terminal emulator, is a modern solution that simulates the console while giving us the flexibility to run multiple sessions easily. So that is what the difference is. Now let me clarify this flow diagram. This flow diagram is for the actual physical console. So we will give our input through this console, and the command given to the console will be given to the cell, which will actually interpret the commands, and this cell will interact with the kernel, and kernel will interact with the hardware, and and that is how our command will be executed. In this diagram here shows the flow for modern terminal emulators. So there will be multiple sessions, and actually it should not be TTYs. It should not be TTY, because TTY are the virtual console. So it is more correct to put PTS here. So it should be PTS0, PTS1, PTS2. So these are the different sessions that are open inside the terminal emulator, and each of these will interact with cell. Now this cell will be like your bash, gss, or the sh, and the remaining things are same. Cell will talk to the kernel, kernel will interact with hardware, and your command will be executed. So this is the whole idea. I hope you understood it. So thank you so much guys for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one.